Welcome to Anti-Racism and Witness, Opposing Racism in the Church and in the World. I apologize for a slightly late start. We were just having some technical issues there getting things set up. But we're so delighted that you could join us this evening for what we think is going to be a really important and interesting conversation. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us live on Zoom, as well as anyone who's joining us live on YouTube, and those who will watch this at a later date on YouTube. As Christians, we believe that racism is a sin against God and against our neighbor. Christians are called not to hate and division, but to pursue justice, reconciliation, and to affirm the dignity of all people. It is in the pursuit of these aims that we are presenting tonight's discussion on anti-racism and allyship, particularly as they pertain to our call as Christians. The land on which our parish church, St. Olave's, is situated is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabeg nations, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Toronto Purchase. Today, Toronto is home to many Indigenous people, and we recognize their enduring presence and connection to this land. And we commit to and pray for the work of reconciliation. Just a few quick notes of housekeeping. You will be kept muted all throughout this evening's discussion. I don't believe you will be able to unmute yourself. We're just doing that in order to ensure that the conversation is streamlined. The chat feature is only enabled to allow you to chat with the administrator of this evening's meeting, who is the Reverend Alexandra Stone. So if you had a technical issue, you could send her a chat message and she will try to help you. And then when we come to the Q&A at the end of the evening, likewise, all questions will be directed towards her in the chat box, in the chat feature, and we will not be able to address all questions, but those that we think will lead to some interesting conversation and that for which we have time, we will put to the panelists. I'd like to thank all those involved with organizing this evening, especially Carol Ambler, Janice Douglas, Anesu Machoko, Ibi Olubodi, and the Reverend Alexander Stone. Our moderator this evening is Brittany Hudson. Brittany is a community developer, content creator, and facilitator, currently connected to the development sector. She is passionate about creating equitable environments for BIPOC and 2SLGBTQIA+ and disabled people through education and participating in community-led initiatives. As a graduate student at Wycliffe College, Brittany reflects on the intersections of faith-based community organizing and government-led initiatives. She's a member of Black Anglicans of Canada, and we are delighted that she will, after a few years away, be returning to our parish as our child and youth minister this fall. Before handing things over to Brittany, I would like to invite you to join me for a brief moment of prayer. Let us pray. O God, grant us the vision of a better country, fair as it might be, a nation of righteousness where none shall wrong their neighbor, a place of plenty where evil and poverty shall be done away, a beacon of equity and justice where all may prosper and thrive, a land of reconciliation and harmony between races, cultures, and traditions, a place of peace where order shall not rest on force but on love. Bless the efforts of the Church to make this vision a living reality, and inspire and strengthen each one of us that we may give the time, thought, and sacrifices needed to speed the day of its coming beauty and righteousness. This we ask through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Okay, welcome everyone. Glad that we can all be here. So as the panelists begin to be added to the screen, I'd like to introduce them. And they'll probably be sharing more about their history and what brings them here. So we'll start with the Right Reverend Chris Harper, Bishop of Saskatoon. Bishop Chris Harper was born in Paradise Hills, Saskatchewan, and spent much of his younger life on Onion Lake, Cree Nation. He was an emergency medical technician before his call to ordination. As a priest, he worked in the dioceses of Saskatchewan, Algoma, and Toronto, where he was the Indigenous priest for the diocese. In 2018, he was elected Bishop of Saskatoon, the first Treaty 6 priest to be ordained as bishop. Welcome, Bishop Chris. We also have Royson James, who's a columnist for the Toronto Star. Over a 35-year career as a reporter at the Toronto Star, Royson James has been a prominent voice of clarity in the city. Working on the municipal affairs beat, his articles have covered issues of equity, race relations, urban development, and politics. He retired from daily reporting in 2016 and currently writes a weekly column for the Star. Welcome, Royson.
Thank you.
And Bhutila Karpoche is an MPP for our riding, Parkdale and High Park. So Bhutila is active on issues around social justice and public health. She's a longtime advocate of affordable housing, workers' rights, and public health care, and recently tabled a bill in the legislature on anti-Asian racism. An epidemiologist by training, Bhutila is a public health researcher focusing on social determinants of health. Welcome, Bhutila. So as you can see, we have some really well-developed panelist group here. So I'm excited to get to know all of you a little bit more and to talk about this really important issue in this topic of anti-racism, allyship, and what the role of our community spaces have in dismantling it. So the first question I have for you is, why are you passionate about this work of anti-racism? So I'd like to start with Bishop Chris, and if you could also just share a little bit more about yourself and what brings your interest in this work. So why are you passionate about anti-racism work?
Well, even the word anti-racism has a broad reach of revealing that it is against any kind of racism. And as one who, as I've always said, I walk in two worlds of the Indigenous community as well as the non-Indigenous. I walk among the traditional and even with the braid and having that sort of sets me aside a little bit different from many of the other bishops. And so I, with a bit of a smile, I get to say that I'm one of the few bishops that has hair. So, but as I've always said, I've walked in two worlds, and of the church, not the church. I've walked in just so many different ways in two worlds, and as one who has experienced and walked through the world of racism for all my life, it's something that's still even continues to this day, and so I've resisted and I've struggled and I've fought against it as best as I could through most of my life. And most of my life, I've had to come out fighting, I guess is a good way to say it. It's not something that you can just roll along with and just say, well, there you go, just another day. You do that for sometimes for our own sanity's sake, but the reality is that it is systemic. It is everywhere, and if you ever just want to just listen to me rant and rave for a while, is just to listen to anyone who dares say that there is no such thing as systemic racism. When you go, but it's there, and it's in everywhere on both sides of the world. And I can tell you that racism, even among the Indigenous people, is there, as well as racism among the non-Indigenous. It's in the church. I experience it, even as a bishop, and at the same time, it is something that we're constantly walking through. And it gets on the bottom of your shoes, whether you like it or not, and it's there. I'm not in a good picture. I could pick a better image, but there you go. I'm blunt. How's that? So anyway, there it is. But it is something that I've lived with all my life, and especially anytime that you get to say that, as a person of color, you start to realize that you stand out in a world that is very much classified, and they where you're sometimes painted with a brush even before you speak, and they have thought an idea of who you are without even knowing you. So, like I said, as one who has been beaten up, spat on, sworn at, threatened, um, it goes on. I can go on and on. Been there, done that. We know exactly what that means, and that's one of the reasons that when we use the word anti-racism, it is something that we all have to stand up against, and something all of us have to be passionate about to be able to call it out and name it wherever it comes in across in our journey of life and faith.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I really resonate with all that you've said. Yeah, so as you could see, our panelists are coming from a vast background, a very different background. So we have Bishop Chris, who's coming from the church, and then we have a media connection, and we also have a political connection. Bhutila, I'm wondering if you could just share why you're passionate about this work, and also how that intersects with the work that you're doing as a politician.
Thank you, Brittany. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for making this space for this discussion and for taking the time to organize this, particularly on anti-racism, such an important topic. And of course, I'm pleased to be here to share my thoughts. Um, you know, I am here as the NPP for Parkdale-High Park, where the church is located, but I'm also here as a human, really, a person who is racialized, who's Asian heritage, an immigrant, a young person. I mean, these are my identities that, are with me wherever I go, and I don't get to check them at the door, unlike being an MPP, which is sort of a role. It's really not my identity, right? So I bring that with me everywhere I go and in everything that I do. So many in the writing particularly know that my ancestry, my heritage is Tibetan. And I came to Canada as a refugee. And if you look at the fact that I was born in a country in Nepal, a land that was not of my parents and my grandparents or my ancestors, and the country that I was born in, the government there did not officially recognize the rights of me as a person. And of course, that's not just unique to me, but to the Tibetan refugees who escaped from Tibet and ended up settling in the neighboring country of Nepal. So if you look at it that way, every moment of my life, the life of many like me, were essentially political decisions. So the way I see it is I was born political. Growing up, I have memories of course, a happy childhood, but things like the precarious status of the Tibetan people was always something that was at the back of my mind. Even as a child, I understood the politics and the policies of discrimination, even though I might not have been able to articulate or even name it, right? It was this understanding of being different, or, of not how things worked or how things worked. So I really grew up with that consciousness of knowing how it really influenced our day-to-day life. And as a student, I got involved in the Tibetan freedom movement. It was sort of a natural thing that I went into, working for basic human rights for Tibetans. And if you really, sort of boil down to it, like the basic human rights as the same as everybody else, right? To live a life free from discrimination, free from racism. And as I did the work, I realized the importance of solidarity, which led me to organizing in the community on many issues, from, as mentioned in the bio, housing issues, workers' rights issues. And really, through that activism, understood that all of our struggles are connected. And so is our liberation, right? Like, our liberation is connected as well. And I knew specifically coming to Canada as a refugee, of course, being very, very grateful to have a home here, to be able to build a new life in this country, and growing and understanding what the project that we call Canada is all about. When I took my citizenship test, I mean, it was one of the happiest days of my life. And I, but the history that I learned through the citizenship exam was very whitewashed. And I had to learn the true history of Canada and make the connection that I myself am a settler here. And what are my responsibilities as an immigrant to this country? And what are the stereotypes or the othering that happens of refugees as people who come to this country just maybe simply to take all the benefits, but not also understanding that we are people. We also love our community. We love the people here. We also want to build this country into a fair and just place. And so I realized that, there are things that I could do. Particularly, I was very interested in doing policy work because I recognize the potency of policy and the ability to be able to make big changes. And that's how I got involved in politics. So that's been my journey. Passion, yes, but I think really also born just out of necessity.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing an echoing that is happening here. So Royson, I'm curious, as I throw this question to you, how has it fueled your work? So why are you passionate about this work? But how has it fueled your professional career as well?
You're asking, am I passionate about the work? Maybe I'm not, right? Listen, I mean, it starts for me in Jamaica, where I was born and spent the first 16 years of my life. And I mean, growing up in Jamaica, it's a society that's very class conscious. Colorism is there and quite evident. From the time I know myself, I've been involved with the church. And in my early years, all the way up to maybe age 15 or so, Africa wasn't really a part of my consciousness, except in, Tarzan movies, right? And so you can imagine the type of imagery that's there and what's inculcated in your mind. So I fully remember 1968. Is that when Martin Luther King was shot, or that's before? I can't. Well, MLK was shot. Fully remember that. I picked up the Gleaner, which is a newspaper in Jamaica, and my grandmother and some other elders in the community, they were under the tree, and I was reading for them the account of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And for me, that was like my awakening, right? Because, you grow up, your doctor is Black, your teachers are Black. I think I had one white Canadian teacher, right? But, you look around and people do look like you. So I didn't grow up with any type of inferiority complex, right? So you're there. But so reading MLK, Martin Luther King, and the life story of African Americans, that was like a huge shock for me. And I remember that night listening to the radio, and they were playing all his speeches. And that was the first time I was like, whoa, really? What do you mean by you can't go to Coney Island? What do you mean by you can't drink from the same fountain? Where have I been? How come I don't know this? This is ridiculous. I remember just listening for hours as they kept playing on MLK's speeches. So that's Jamaica. So I come to Canada, 1969, right? So my high school, we had 3, 4 Black students, right? Harvard Collegiate downtown. And so I'm propped into Canada. And I think I pretty much grew up like most high school students. I didn't have many overt instances that I recognized, right, as racism. I mean, maybe now I would easily recognize a lot of microaggressions more so than I did then. So I grew up here, studied journalism, and started working. Very clear understanding of my place in society. That is that, hey, you don't have all the privileges of years and generations of people who are there to clear the path for you, so that your dad or your uncle or your uncle's friend isn't going to be able to get you a job or a good reference. So you got to work hard. And I started working at the Toronto Star, and I've always loved sports. But I remember specifically not pursuing writing for the sports department, because I remember several of the early assignments that I went to, when they hear that you're a reporter, and a lot of times people would say, really? Like, it's clear, like, I don't believe this. But once they get past that, they say, oh, so what do you do? Sports? So I made sure that I wouldn't play into the stereotype of covering sports. And so I started covering municipal politics, covering City Hall. So I've covered City Hall from 1980 until I retired in 2016. And developed a bit of an expertise on what happens in the city, covering all the municipalities. So I'm writing politics, and politics is what happens at City Hall, and not much else, except from time. If you looked all across the newspapers across the country, then and now, actually, I think I was the only Black columnist in the country. Think of all the newspapers in the country. The only columnist on staff in the entire country. So there were times when the Star wanted to do stories about race relations, etc., and they would like, Royson, can you, do you think you can write about this? That type of approach. So they would gingerly approach, right? And okay, I wrote the first one, massive reaction. And he read the second one, massive reaction. And so a game changer occurred 2000, 2007, 2008. Dr. Afua Cooper, who is a poet and a historian, she called me, met me in City Hall, and said, Royson, next year is the bicentennial of the ending of the slave trade. And I'm like, it is? She said, yes. And well, how come I don't know about this? And it put me right back to when Martin Luther King got killed, right? And I'm like, this is ridiculous. How come there's nothing in the paper? Nobody's written about it. She said, yeah, that's why I'm coming to you. You've got to write about it. The federal government said that they would put it in the school curriculum, and they haven't done anything. And 200th anniversary, Royson, and nobody's talking about it. So it shook me up. And I'm thinking, so, wow, if we had 10 or 12 Black columnists across the country, if I didn't know or if I forgot, then columnist number 2 wouldn't have forgotten, or columnist number 3 would, or number 4, or maybe number 6, well, one of us at least. And it struck me like, this is ridiculous. I remember going back to the computer, and I was just so mad, and I wrote this stinging column cussing out the federal government for not pushing this and telling us about it. And then I said, okay, I got to do something about this. And I got to the Star, and I said, hey, next year is the bicentenary. You need to send me to Africa. I need to go back. I need to retrace the slave trade, and I'll find some Canadians who are going, and I'll do a story on that. And the Star fortunately sent me to Ghana. I visited the slave dungeons. I went up to Ashantiland, and it was the most amazing experience in my life to actually set foot on the continent where my ancestors came from. And I came back just being very bold and saying, even though I'm writing about politics, yeah, I'll write 2 columns about politics, but the 3rd column will be about race relations, will be about how the Western world has affected my people and why we see the dysfunctions and why people are out in the street shooting people. There's a reason, there's a connection, there's a link. And so that has been my passion. It's not something that I just was born with. It's something I grew into, and it was out of necessity.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you to all of you for sharing your stories and for really getting this conversation started. So I'm sure there's some words that we use, there's some terms that we use. I think it might be really helpful for us to just bring some clarity to them. So one word Bishop Christie used, systemic racism, and I would hope by now that we all know the word or the term, what it means and what it stands for. But Royson, you're the wordsmith. So if it's possible, you're an honorary definer for today. Can you define what systemic racism is? And maybe share a story about how you see it work within your field. So you kind of actually did that in some way, actually. So maybe you did that through steering. Yeah. So how about you just define? If you could define for me what most racism is, and then I'll pass on the question to the other 2 panelists to share what their experience has been.
Yeah, I think most people, you say racism, they get it. I think, right? Or they sort of get it, and then it's the systemic part that I guess that throws you. And for me, it's in the water, it's in the air, it's in the system, it's steeped. It's like, how did I get to be Canadian? I came in 1969. I've been in this country twice, 3 times as long as I was in Jamaica, right? How do you become Canadian? How did I get to like hockey as opposed to cricket, right? How is it that I see a Sikh and I embrace that person? What is it? How do I get to be that way? What are the images? And I look at my children and my grandchildren, and I listen to the words, the language in movies, in popular culture, and I see the things that bombard them, right? And as Christians, we're concerned about secularism. Okay, and we see how this world is very secular, and you see how our kids just absorb all that stuff, and you say, hey, that has an impact on you. So it's everything that you do, all the impacts, everything that impacts your life. When those touch points have an undertaking or underpinning that says this is right, this is preferable, this is what's desirable, right? As opposed to over here, when it says that Brittany, the way she looks, right, is more important than the way Bhutila looks, right? What does that say? That's the society, that's the system that's saying this is what's desirable, this is what's good. And when you are fed that every day in every facet of your life, with lots of the time you don't even know that you're feeding into it. When you're fed that every day, then hey, it has an impact on you. As a kid, colorism that I grew up with wasn't racism, but colorism, yeah, the lighter you are, well, yeah, the better you are. That's part of the colonial mentality. That's colonialism that was bred into you, right? Because of course, if the master had a child with one of the slaves, and that child has higher status than somebody else who doesn't have white blood. So this whole white supremacy that underpins everything, part of the system, that gives you a sense of systemic racism. And also, that's why it's so difficult to root out, because it's centuries. It took us centuries getting there, and it'll take us that long to get out of it.
Yeah. So I see, Bishop Chris, I saw your finger, so I'll let you go first.
I was about to say, yeah, Royson, you did really good. Yeah, I could have, gone with another words with process, with also the systemic racism is also part of that, which plays into other words that we use of such as privilege, where, you get to say things and do things without thinking about it, and it's considered okay, where somebody else doesn't have that privilege to be able to do that. Even with statements, I remember once being asked, that you're Indigenous, huh? And I said, yeah, I'm a full treaty Indian. You're not dark enough to be an Indian. I'm going, okay, thank you. But again, privilege allows you to say that. And where I would never say that, and this is one of the things that I've always found very interesting, especially through time and place. And Royson, you said that especially about colorism. That's that's a new word I'm going to start with your permission. I'm going to embrace, but it helps us to understand also that what we do even with ourselves. So on the reserve, yes, I am lighter than others. So I am, picked on for that when I was a kid. But yet when I go off the reserve, then I'm picked on because I'm too dark. I guess as a bishop, I can say that: damned if you do, damned if you don't. But this is the reality, especially when we're talking about, colorism and racism and privilege. Those things that there's a lot of things that Royson said that that resound with me. Is there's a lot of things that people of color have had to work with twice as hard to prove ourselves, twice as hard and faithfully to try to achieve that which is almost a given for everybody else.
Right.
And even to a point where, even today, as a bishop, where I'm still classified just, oh boy, there's the screen, just a little bit less, because I do have hair and I do make the signs of who I am and what I am, rather than at the same time as the bishop of what I represent. And so this is where, you know, a lot of this comes into play, the privilege, and at the same time, the other chances of slowing down and holding ourselves back. Because, you know, I was listening to Royson, and I was going like, wow, that would have been amazing and beautiful to even have those experiences, because I grew up in a very complicated, problematic way, you know, especially, you know, my mother was in residential school, so we didn't have all those other things. I grew up with the adage and the idea that was drilled into me from, again, passed on down from the residential school: you're an Indian, you're nothing, you'll never be anything, don't try. And so this is something that I've had to, and that was when I talk about, you know, the healing process. Every day for me is the healing process. Every day is something that I stand up and, you know, anytime I put on a shirt and go into the office and sit behind the desk, you know, I've had discussions, and, you know, where people have come into the office and thought the other person, you know, what was the bishop. You know, and then, you know, I remember you know, one of them saying, maybe you should direct your questions to the man over there. He's the bishop. And I'm sitting across the desk and I go, hi, how about we start again? But again, you know, again, privilege, and at the same time, the struggles of systemic racism, which is there in everything. It's, as you know, as my brother said, it is in the air, it's in the water. And, you know, but it's something that is learned also, because you put any of the kids right up to about 5 years of age into the playground, and they will play with absolute harmony and love each other and respect each other. But after that, then it comes from what we teach our kids at home about others. That's when the separations start to happen. So yeah, I don't want to monopolize, which is easy for me to do. So I you know, Bhutila, I opened the door for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with both Royson and Bishop Chris. You know, if you really look at it in the simplest of terms, systemic racism is really just a gentler, maybe, way of talking about white supremacy, because we do still have fear in talking about white supremacy. And, you know, when we say systemic racism, we talk about racism that exists in all facets of our life, as Royson said, you know, in our institutions, in our policies. And we think about how it oppresses certain people. But again, we don't, you know, take necessarily that extra step to ask ourselves why, you know, like, why is it that we have these things built into our institutions and policies? And again, the answer is it's to uphold white supremacy. And I want to be clear, because, you know, the term white supremacy sometimes is perceived very controversial, and it's not about, you know, white people thinking they are superior than others. I mean, there are some, of course, who think that way, but not, because at the end of the day, it's not about the individual person when we talk about systemic issues, right? And it's not about superiority of people. It's really about how the foundation of everything in our lives, the system, everything is created to benefit white people and hurt people of color. And so I think that when we talk and do the work of anti-racism, we must be also very direct in saying that it is the work of dismantling white supremacy. And I'll give you an example, because
Yeah.
I see it in my work, and I'll give very specific examples. So folks know my background's in public health. I focused my training on social determinants of health. And when we look at the determinants of health, you know, I was trained to look at housing, income, environment, all of these things that for a very long time, and still, you know, we know influences health in the most significant ways. And you know, we list things like race, sex, but really, if you think about it, it's not so much the race and the sex of the person, but it's the racism, right? That sexism that the people experience that impacts their health. Because just because a person's Black is not going to determine the health outcomes, but because of the experience of being a Black person can determine their health. And if you look at how Western medical system was forced upon Indigenous people, with their traditional healing systems being erased. Again, that's structural, right? So no matter whatever great innovations or good that may have come out of the Western medical system, it is built to serve white people. If you look at some things like symptoms that maybe physicians or health practitioners look for in the skin, for example, right? They'll, a symptom for a particular illness or condition might be a pink rash. Well, a rash on black skin is not necessarily going to look pink, right? That's the description based on white skin. That's a very, very small example. But if you look at more significant, more policy-based examples, the sickle cell example, it's a life-threatening blood disease that impacts mostly Black people, fatal if not treated, causes a lot of pain, sends people to emergency, but most Black people, their experience at the emergency centers is that, practitioners feel or like categorize or think that they might be drug users who are not really in pain, but just use it there to get drugs. And then on top of that, in Ontario, we have no protocol for how sickle cell is treated or received when people show up at the emergency. Right. So here you have again a healthcare system that is not designed to serve the Black population, because sickle cell, which particularly majority impacts Black people, and how can it be that the healthcare system has no protocol to address this? And I, for example, learned about it because Black people told us about it in the legislature. We had our Black caucus members, Black MPPs who worked on this, and that's how I learned about it. And as I looked into this, I was surprised to know that sickle cell disease, for example, was described more than 100 years ago, but the development of therapies and treatment has been pretty much stagnant because there hasn't been enough research, into sickle cell. On the other hand, when you look at some similar, not similar, but if you look at some other diseases, and I won't name them because I don't want to create this perception that I'm saying one is more important than the other, but like some newer as in like diseases that may have been discovered or where understanding may have come a bit later. There have been increased life quality because treatments have been discovered or innovated sooner because there have been so much funding. And again, when you look at those treatments and those diseases, it's majority impacting, say, the white population. So that's how it exists, where all of our policies, all of the programs and services and everything is really benefiting a specific population. And in this case, it is the white population. And it hurts. It really hurts other people because the focus really has been on that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I just want to encourage every single person who's watching this, if some of these terms are new for you, if you've never heard of systemic racism or white supremacy or privilege, I'm encouraging you to continue reading, but also maybe watch this again. Sometimes when we listen to something for the first time, it takes some time to sink in. So this is on YouTube, so we can watch this again and really just let's call it the term I'm looking for. Let it marinate. Let it marinate, and I'm sure the information will sit a lot better. So let's look at how the response. What is our response to these things that are happening? So we know that for the past couple of years, more folks, especially more white Canadians, have come to terms with people in North America particularly have come to terms with the reality that racialized people are experiencing racism, and it's not just a small action, but it is a systemic problem. So we've been seeing these things, unfortunately, through televised deaths, or maybe someone having, like in Toronto right now, there is a group of people who are suing. I think it's the province, public or workers that are suing the province for anti-Black racism. So we're hearing about these things more often. What can the church do? So how does the work of anti-racism relate to our call as Christians to witness of the kingdom of God? So Bishop Chris, I'm sure you're constantly wrestling with this as a bishop. What's our response? What is the church's role in tackling anti-racism?
Right now, I've been saying that knowledge is key. There is a lot of ignorance out there, and ignorance in two steps. Now, ignorance of not knowing, and ignorance in not caring to know the difference. And I think that so knowledge is key right now to teach, and that's what I've really been pushing, not only within the diocese, but in all the talks and presentations. And lately, anyone that is Indigenous, and especially that is connected to the church, is like the belle of the ball right now in these present day and time, with the revelation of the Indian residential school graves, unmarked graves. The tombstones haven't been taken down and bulldozed or whatever it was, and how that happened, and the lack of record keeping, the lack of information being sent home to the parents, and then people just how they respond to all of that. You know, some said, "Well, why did they send their kids then?" And I'm going, "They didn't." You know, the government came in with the Indian agent, with the priest, and the RCMP, and took the children. And that is, bear with me, that's one of the reasons that they came up with this. I don't know if I can do this right. Hold on here. I'm going to take this while I talk, take this wonderful screen background off. But to be able to, they came for the children. You know, all about the residential school, about what Canada did. And I'll hold it there because I see some people are trying to take pictures of it. But there it is. They came for the children. And you know, there's a reason that these books are out. There's a reason that the TRC report was put out, Volume 4, which nobody really looked at, which talked about the reality that we as Indigenous people have been saying, that, you know, that there are children that didn't come home. And why isn't anybody saying anything about this? Why is the church not doing anything about this? And all of a sudden now, it started in Kamloops, 215 little souls their voices have finally been heard. Cowessess in southern Saskatchewan here, 700 plus unmarked graves. We're talking about Larange, we're talking about all the other ones. There's more all across this land of the Indian residential school, and the history that we as Canadians have to live with. It's something history cannot be erased, not without great difficulty. You know, I love documentaries, and I've seen what they, you know, for example, in the old days with the pharaohs, if they didn't like the pharaoh who did, then that name was stricken from all the rocks and all the papyruses and everything else that went along. But there is still that void in history for that timeline.
Right.
So all I'm trying to say is knowledge is key right now to teach about what we need to do to understand each other as Canadians, and that history, whether we take down all the monuments, whether we take down all the plaques, the statues, and everything else like that, those that there needs to be teaching as to what and how this happened, because I get it from both sides. That's why I say I walk in two worlds all the time, because I hear from the Indigenous communities that, you know, they don't see the differences between denominations, so they're saying burn all the churches.
Yeah,
that's not the answer. Because they're speaking, they're showing their frustration, their anger, their hurt, their pain, their mourning, and nobody's listening, and they want to make a point. And that's why knowledge is the key. We need to teach them about what happened with the residential school and how the church played its part, the government played its part, and all the denominations played their parts. So this is, there's a lot to be teaching of to go forward from here, and on both sides, on all sides, and especially for everybody as Canadians, because this affects us all. And but it's at the same time, I hear from the other side, well, come on, why don't those Indians just get over, let's move on. We're in the 20th, the new century. Come on, let's just move on to the new age and everything else like that. But there's also a lot of distractions too. Look how busy June is with all the days of celebration of everything else like that. And so people have asked me, well, how come you're not celebrating this? How come you're not celebrating that? How come you're not speaking about that? I said, I'm in mourning.
Yeah.
As an Indigenous man, I'm in mourning. How can I celebrate? How can I use fireworks and celebrate the day and everything else, raise a glass and toast you, and everything else like that, if I'm in mourning?
Yeah.
And we as Canadians are in this together. Anyone who's even come to the land, welcome to the inherited issue. And the Indigenous people, we're still here. The most studied, but nobody knows anything about us. And at the same time, we're everywhere. But yet, when you have bishops say, well, we don't have Indigenous people in our area, I'm going, seriously? Really? And so anyway, like I said, education is key.
Yeah, no, that's education is one of the starting points. We can't move forward unless we know, right?
That's right.
So I'm confident that there are people who are watching, because I've seen this a lot where folks are thinking, I might not have power within my local church. I might not be a warden or this or that. So they might be thinking, okay, I can learn about this, but I might not have room to make change within my church. So for Royson and Bhutila, I'm thinking about the larger community as well. What kind of work can the larger community do, whether it be within their faith-based spaces or maybe even on their job, within their neighborhoods? What can they do to help dismantle racism?
This is, your audience is primarily a church audience, I would think, right? And we are guilty. So when the bishop says education, we're not just talking about, oh, well, you should go read that book, They Came for Our Children, and understand what systemic racism means. We're talking about, this goes to the core of who we are and what we are. I mean, I have debates and conversations with people all the time who will want to know, how can you be a Christian? I hope you don't have a white Jesus in your house, right? That's going to traumatize your children. How can you have your children look at a white Jesus all their life and then have any self-respect for themselves, or your God doesn't look like you? Right? We have to realize that, for my people, when I went to Ghana and at the slave dungeon, which is where they kept the slaves until the ship came in, and you could be in there for months, and thousands, millions died in those dungeons. Right above the slave dungeons were 1, 2, 3 churches. The churches where the slaveholders worshipped on Sunday. And Sunday night, they went and availed themselves of all the women that they wanted. And on the plantation, the guy who is preaching on Sunday is whipping the slaves and raping the woman the next day. That's part of our legacy. Anglicans, oh yeah, and Codrington Estate in Barbados. They branded the slaves with the seed of Codrington.
Yeah.
That's the legacy. And so when you talk to your children and who are traumatized by this society, they want to know, how can you do that? How do you want me, Dad, to be part of that religion? And it's serious. It's what I say, it's in the air, in our skin, and I can't listen to the news these past days about the residential children and not cry. It's part of my history, part of my legacy. It's part of my fellow Christian brethren. And so when you ask, what do? We've got to confront that. We've got to be at the forefront of fixing this, of the reconciliation and the change that's required. The church can't be lagging behind. We got to be at the forefront.
Yeah.
Because we were at the forefront of a lot of this ill and the devastation that's happened to people of color across the Western world. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Thank you for your honesty.
This is the thing that I think that we need to do is to understand that it's part of our history of who we are.
Yeah.
Even I agree. Royson, I agree with you. Even my own relatives have said, "How can you be part of a church that has worked to try to destroy us as a people?" And I said, "What better place to be than a place of healing?" There's a difference between, especially, I still go back with it, and I don't know if anyone else wants to, send me a paper that, that says otherwise. But I think it goes right back to the time of the Renaissance, when we started to change things and anglicize absolutely everything, from the way the Last Supper, the way it looks. But you have to understand that Jesus was a man of color. And somehow, somewhere, some way, there's been some change in the process, in the system, that has said that is wrong. Instead, he is this idealized individual. And that's one of the reasons that, even when I take a look at, even the scriptures and the passages in there, and it says, because that's something that we teach in the church, is to look for Christ in the eyes of the other. And John 14, 18 to 20, I believe, says that. And, it goes something like this. I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming. Yeah, I'm coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, because Jesus is talking. But you will see me because I live in you, and you also will live. And then the last part is the most that stays with me. On that day, you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. And this resounds for people who are thinking that they are less than. And that's why in the church that we need to get back to the scripture to teach and to see that, even where Jesus says that I am in you. And thus the challenge for the church, any Christian then, is to see Christ in the eyes of the other. And look beyond the out, how well they dress and how beautiful their hair is, and how, glorious they have, their skin radiates, and how few wrinkles they have. I know that I'm getting like, anyway, but the reality is to see Christ in the eyes of the other, whoever they may be, our brothers, sisters, our relatives.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bhutila.
Thank you, both Royson and Bishop Chris, for that. I mean, I'm not a Christian. I don't practice Christianity, but I was raised by Roman Catholic nuns. So I know some basics of Christianity. And, I think that like all religions, it's about love and loving thy neighbor. And I think that if if what it means be a true Christian, doing God's work is doing the work of love. And I think we have to keep in mind that the work of anti-racism is rooted in love. It's about very simply loving people and taking action. I always think of bell hooks, who I read as a teenager. And that's why, as the church especially, you can't just preach God's love, but you have to actually do the work. And the church, as Royson says, has must be at the forefront of this.
Thank you. I'm cognizant of the time, and I know that folks probably have questions. We talked about a lot. We have really gotten deep for the I guess it's a little bit under an hour that we've been speaking. So we've gotten into some hard stuff. My Caribbean background is making me think of hard food, which is not something that it's something you have to, when you eat, you have to sit down, you got to have it, you got to take a break for a little bit after you have that food. So let's just give folks maybe some advice. So let's think of one thing that someone can do as an ally to oppose racism in all its forms. So this is something that can apply to all of us. One thing that someone can do, maybe something very tangible that they can do to oppose racism. And I'll just, should I give you guys a minute? Let's give you guys like a millisecond to think about it. One thing that someone can do. And then the first person that has that response, you just yell it.
Read Isaiah chapter 58. We think of the New Testament, as expressing, love your neighbor as yourself, and all those modern lessons. But you go all the way back to the Old Testament. Isaiah 58 says, "Is this the fast I have ordered? Try to impress me with your sacrifices." Right? It's talking directly to us as church people, right? Try to impress me with your sacrifices. No. I want you to loose the chains of injustice. Set the oppressed free. Feed the hungry. Provide shelter for the homeless. He can't be more clear. Like he says, I despise your feasts and the noise of your songs. I'm not, if it's not accompanied by justice, I'm not interested. So that's our marching order.
Yeah.
As Christians. I mean, it can't be any clearer than that. So people who are there advocating for the homeless, we should be right there with them out front, right? Want to set the oppressed free, we should be right there. Reconciliation, oh buddy, we're leading the charge, because that's our mandate or a mantra. That's what we should be living. So hey, whenever you get a chance and you hear people who are oppressed and you see injustice or they're hungry, be there for them.
Amen.
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 For me, I would say, and I say this also looking today at everybody's faces, those who have attended have attended this discussion in the Zoom call. I would say keep pushing. and start being okay with being uncomfortable. I remember I read somewhere, and I think it captures it quite nicely. You know, the work of anti-racism is the practice of being uncomfortable. You know, you constantly have to push yourself, and you have to push those around you to ask, you know, why is it that things are this way? Any kind of fear or hesitation that you might have about leaving the familiar, and venturing into the unfamiliar, if you really think about it, is not really unfamiliar, because it might be unfamiliar to you, but for a lot of people, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, it's their daily life, right? So I would say, especially as a community of worshipers at the church, just keep pushing yourself, and being uncomfortable is a learn to how you can live with it. That means, you know, out of the zone that you feel, that is the familiar world to you. By doing that, uh,
Oh, I think you might have.
did I freeze?
Oh, no, you didn't freeze. I just think there was like a background sound that I was hearing. I'm not sure who it was coming from, but I think it was just right at the end. It's just right at the end. Yeah.
If I can, I've been using an adage, a little phrase that's, especially since we're in this time right now where the past and the history is coming to the front of all things, and where, you know, people love to use these other words like cancel culture and everything else that gets in there. But I've been using a little phrase along with everybody that it sort of helps. I'm hoping it helps. And all I'm, you know, especially, you know, as a bishop, you start to see things a little bit differently. Even when, you know, I say, you know, be good. You know, everyone, oh, there goes no fun, that kind of idea and thought. But one of the things that I've been trying to say is this: strive to be better today than you were yesterday. Strive to be better today than you were yesterday. Yesterday, you can't change that which was, and that which is done is done. But you can control the immediate and how you're going to respond in the future. And that will set the tone, that will set the pace, that will set the atmosphere of how we change things in the world. And if we strive to be better today, in this moment, than we were yesterday, the world will improve. I agree, you know, that I don't like to watch the news, and it is very, very painful. But at the same time, I try to keep things in balance and stay in the numbers, be cognizant of exactly what needs to be said and done, and how to say it with as much pastoral love and care for all people on all sides of the fence, and to recognize and see that all people, as people of God, children of God, looking for the eyes in their eyes, the soul that God gave them, and to celebrate that life and that peace and promise. So again, strive to be better today than you were yesterday is what I'm trying to get across to everybody, especially through the church, rather than give them the blessing and say, you know, be good. They are for almost an 18th of a millisecond. And then after that, human condition comes back into play.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Royson. Thank you, Bishop Chris, and thank you, Bhutila, for sharing your experience, for being honest, and for admonishing us on the steps that we need to take to change the communities that we're in. So I just want to remind us of some of the encouragements that we're given. So this is your homework. I want you to go home and read. Well, you are home, so I want you to, when you log off, read Isaiah 58. I want you to be okay with being uncomfortable. Get used to that. Get used to being uncomfortable. And I want you to strive to be better today than you were yesterday. So these are the encouragements. This is the action item that you have. So with that, I'm sure you have questions. I'm sure you have lots and lots of questions. So let's open the question door, shall we? Okay, apparently there was only one question, which means everyone was super clear. So someone was wondering, and I guess how we'll do this is I'll see that the question isn't geared to anyone specific. I'll leave the floor open to all of you. So someone was wondering if anyone had advice on how to speak to children about racism. Oh, so Royson, you're muted, but it looked like Bhutila, you wanted to say something. So I'll open the door to you first.
Okay, for me, one of the things that I have been trying to do with my kids, especially my older one, she's 6 now, so she is of that age, even though I had started it much earlier. I started taking her with me everywhere I went, as much as I can, to rallies, to protests, because I can explain things to her, or I can make her experience it herself as well, right? And so being in that space, knowing how to show up for others, knowing how to, hearing the chants, knowing what the words are that are being used, all of that comes from being physically there. And so as a parent, I've done that. I've also relied a lot on children's books. There are plenty out there. The first alphabet book that my child read was A for Activist, which is a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And really, for me.
Oh, just 1 second, Bhutila. I didn't get your audio. I'm not sure if it's Royson, if there's like some sort of fan or something that might be on. That might be blocking the sound sometimes.
But we try muting on our ends too.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, so go ahead.
I was almost going to end it anyways. So the two things that I've been very deliberate about is trying to take her to these spaces, to have these experiences, to show it rather than just talk about it, and really rely on the great resources that already exist to talk to children. And I guess I'll add a third one is really take the time to talk about it at that moment when it happens, So for example, most recently, I took her with me.
Okay. I'm not sure if it's on your end. I'm not sure.
She had a lot of questions when I took her recently to a vigil when the news broke about the 250 children's bodies found in. And so we did take the time in the evening, even though she went to bed really late that night, to really talk about and answer all her questions at that moment. I didn't put it off because I felt that when she's curious about it, I address it at that moment, and have that discussion there. So to take time to address it at that particular time is also important.
Yeah, very, very important. So you recommended A for Activism, which is a great book, really lovely pictures as well. So I'd recommend it if you're a visual learner. And also I think another one I'll recommend is Anti-Racist Baby, which I think it came out relatively recent. I think it's probably a year now. But that's another resource that someone can tap into. So Royson, Bishop Chris, do you have anything to add to how to talk to children about racism?
I mean, nothing beats being there and experiencing it, you know. Um, and it's always better than making a big thing over it, and you know, oh, we're gonna have this important talk, right? No, I mean, kids learn as they go, and so if you explore at all times opportunities to speak to the other, to experience the other, to share with the other, then it becomes very natural to your children, right? You can't say that, oh, yeah, well, you know, we're all the same, honey. And then somehow the same person who's your neighbor, you never talk to, you never share anything with. Right? So it's just living that and going out of your way to show your kids and to have your kids experience other people, other food, other experiences, just and that's like osmosis, right?
Yeah.
It'll just seep into their system. Um, yeah, to me that's the major issue in terms of having your children then adopt those types of sensibilities that you want them to have.
Thank you.
For the Christian side is, the parable of the Good Samaritan, who is my brother, as well as in the Indigenous community, the teachings of the grandfather teachings about respect, dignity, truth, honor, and just it helps, I think, all of us to understand that the ideals that we need to carry as a society, and especially using that beautiful word community, is something that we can learn, that we can teach to our children about what community is. Community is more than just your parents, but it is also something bigger. It is about who we are as a society, where we are within the city, within the reserve, wherever we are, within even the churches, or places where we find those places of solace and strength that feed us, feed our souls, not just our bodies. Though I do love food, I think that's one of the greatest commonalities that we do have as human beings is the joy of sharing a meal, the joy of sharing food. And it brings everyone to the common table, and where it's hard to enjoy a meal while you're angry. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
Instead, there's laughter, there's joy, there's peace, there's hope, there's love within the family table, the familial table. And that's what community is all about. And I think that especially with all the diversity that we have in this wonderful country we call Canada, we should be the happiest. And I think we'll get there. We'll get there. I get to smile and laugh with, especially when I hear about, the Americanized kind of sayings and thoughts that, well, as Canadians, well, they're just so nice anyway. I was in New York one time, and you're from Canada? Oh, yeah. Say something nice. I thought, goodness sakes. But there it is. We can teach each other about community, and especially with the children, passing on the grandfather teachings about, what is ideal for us as human beings, how we should look after each other, care for each other, who is our neighbor, who is my brother, who is my sister, who is my family. And as Indigenous people, that's one of the things we always say is welcome, my relatives, because you are all my relatives. We are one and under this great umbrella we call creation. And God has created us so marvelously that there is only one Brittany, there is only one Royson, there is only one Bhutila, and the world celebrates that. And we need to pass that on. That is the beauty, that is the joy of who we are as Canadians, who we are as people of God's creation. So there it is. I can preach, so I better step down.
Well, we did have a question about the author for the book that you showed us. They Came for the Children. Could you share with us who the author is for that? book?
Yes, that is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada.
Okay.
Take a look at it. It's online. You can download it. It is a weighty tome, I remember, because I had to fly them back home when I received my copies. And I just about barely made the limit on the weight in my suitcase. So this is not too thick a one, but this is just that they came for the children. But there's another one which is called the Report for the TRC. There's also the one that I'm going to try to get through again is the report on the missing children, as well as the missing and murdered Indigenous women and men of in Canada here. So there's a lot of reports to read. But very few have actually ever taken the time or delved into and dived into them to actually understand them. And that's one of the reasons that, especially, I'll just use my last minute here to tout this, is that we need to really get conscious of what we are as Canadians. Mm-hmm. And that is at the same time looking at how long it's taken us to get even to pass Bill C-15 for UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations of Rights of Indigenous People. Yeah. It's taken us this long. And I've been, up to now, I'm going to have to change my format and, my PowerPoints, because up till now, I've been able to say that even as an Indigenous man, we came from here. For goodness sakes, this is our land. And at the same, I get to do with the absolute bit of a smile and say, I still get rent from everybody for, once a year, my $5 rent for all of Canada, both my wife, and my children. But we didn't have rights. 1964 before we were allowed to vote. 1964, 65 before they allowed us off the reserve without a permit. Up till then, and up till now. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And but yeah, everyone, please take a look. It's the Truth and Reconciliation of Commission of Canada, and there's you can find it online. And I doubt you'll be able to find the books right now, but there's also other wonderful books. There's the 21 Things You Didn't Know About Treaty Rights, or the treaties. Another fantabulous book to take a look at.
I'm wondering if we could share that in the chat, if that's possible, or maybe in our YouTube, in the video, in the YouTube recording, we can also have that included. I think it's important for us to read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and really make sense of it. It is a lengthy read, and it will take time, but so is the progress that we need to make within our society. So it is a part of putting in that time. So I would encourage you to start to read it. And while you're reading it, do the work. I talk a lot about doing chewing gum and walking at the same time. It's important that we don't just read it, but we also live it as well. So I encourage you to continue to do that. Oh, perfect. It's in the chat. Awesome.
There it is. Yeah. trc.ca.
Great. Okay, so I'm looking at our time. We have 1 more minute. So let me thank you all for being with us, for giving us your time and sharing your expertise. We're very grateful. And I'm going to say it again. I really encourage everyone that's watched to watch us again and to let it marinate so that you can really make sense of what the next steps are for you as an individual and as a community, how we move forward from the place that we are right now. And let me just double check something. I'm seeing something coming in. Okay, okay, great. All right, so thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bishop Chris. Thank you, Royson. Thank you, Bhutila. And blessings on your journeys.
And I just want to say thank you as well so much from all of us at St. Olave's. This has been a very honest and insightful conversation. It's been wonderful. It's been educational. It has helped us to confront some of the things that we need to confront. And speaking for myself personally, it has helped inspire me to be more courageous in my effort to, as you say, Bishop, strive to be better today than I was yesterday. And so thank you all for your time. and for all of this. And as we close, I wonder if we could just ask you to offer a prayer, Bishop.
Absolutely. Let us pray. Creator God, we give you thanks and praise for the day that you've given to us. We thank you for the summer sun and the heat. We thank you for the cooling breeze. We thank you for the wisdom, the words of others, our brothers and sisters around us, who journey with us in this, what we call life and faith. Creator, we ask that you strengthen us so that we can be better today, that all that we do may bless our brothers and sisters in creation, that we can learn to humble ourselves and to walk and to talk with truth and peace. We thank you for the life that you've given to us, and we thank you for the memory of those that have gone past and who now rest with you. We pray and lift up to you those who are hurting, those in mourning. We lift up to you and pray for those most in need, in their brokenness, in their frustration, their anger. Grant them peace. Be with us now as we go forward through the course of this day and into the evening, that we may be peace, and that we may be better. We thank you for this time, and we even thank you for the technology in which we're able to still gather through this tumultuous and conflicted time. Be with us now, that we may go forward with open hearts, open minds, and be truthful of what is inside each and every one of us. Heal us, strengthen us, and bless us. And all this we lift up to you and we pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. God bless you all. Peace be with you all. And health.
Amen.